Alright, today we're going to do page 6 and 8. It's numbers 24 to 48 even. It's part 2 of that 2-part assignment from the book that we've been working on in class. You're going to use standard form. Remember, standard form is written, it looks like this, where you have y equals ax squared, so you have an x squared, you have an x, and you have something without it. There might just be an x squared term, but there at least has to be an x squared term. That's how I know it's a quadratic. And I know the graph has to be a U or an upside down U. Step 1 says find A, B, and C. Really easy. Step 2, find the vertex. You just take those A's and the A and B from step 1 and you plug it in. Step 3, you put that vertex in the middle. That's the only difference, is that now our XY chart has different numbers. It might have different numbers for every problem. You need 5 points total, and you plug them in, you make your XY chart. So, 24, we have y equals negative 2x squared minus 6x plus 3. So step 1 says we have to find A, B, and C. So step 1 says I'm going to find the x squared. I'm going to look right in front of it, and that's the number is A. So A is negative 2. To find B, I look at the x, and I look right in front of it. B is negative 6. C is the number all by itself. Now remember, that C is the y-intercept. So I already know that 0, 3 is a point on my graph. Step 2, you're going to have to find the vertex. To find the vertex, you have to use the vertex formula. X equals the opposite of B all over 2A. Now remember, if you're going to use your calculator to help you out, put that bottom in parentheses. So I'm going to put negative 6 on top, so the opposite of negative 6 is just positive 6. And then I have 2 times negative 2. I end up with 6 over negative 4. That's just negative 1.5, or maybe I would probably write negative 1.5. So, step 3 says you have to make an XY chart. Negative 1.5 is in the middle. Now, I always like to put nice numbers on my XY chart. So, I always think, okay, what's really close to negative 1.5? What about negative 1? And then if I have negative 1, I'm going to put 0 on that XY chart. Now remember, I want to be able to use the rainbow effect. I have to be able to use the rainbow effect. So I want negative 1 and some number to be the same distance. So negative 2 is the same distance from negative 1. From negative 1.5 as negative 1. So to go from negative 1.5 to 1, I got bigger by a half. To get to negative 2, I got smaller by a half. Same distance, they'll rainbow. Now, if I want 0 to rainbow, I need to be at negative 3, because those are the same distance. Now, I don't have to plug in 3. I already know, because the y-intercept, 0 is 3. Which means I don't have to plug in negative 3. It's also 3. Now, that works out really nicely. I just have to plug in 1. So y equals, I'm going to say, negative 2 times negative 1 squared minus 6 times negative 1 plus 3. I get negative 2 plus 6 plus 3. I get 9 minus 2 is just 7. Now look, see, I didn't even have to plug in negative 2. I already know it's 7. And now I have to plug in negative 1/2, or negative 1.5. I plug that in. And I'm going to get 7.5. Now here's what I'm doing to make my life a little bit easier. I'm going to make my x values just a little bit different. So I'm not going to change my y's, but I am going to change my x's. That's going to be negative 1. That's going to be negative 2, and that's going to be negative 3. I just went by halves. There's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. So I'm going to go left 1.5 up to 7.5. Put a dot. I'm going to go left 1 up to 7, put a dot. Right 1 up to 7, put a dot. I'm going to go 0, 0, 3, negative 3, 3. Right? I'm going to put I'm going to connect my dots. There's my U. Remember, if you want, you can put your little dotted line down the center. That's your axis of symmetry. And it's just like this, make sure our graph makes a nice U, a symmetrical U. It looks good. Alright, number 26 is f of x equals negative 6x squared minus 4x minus 5. Remember, if you don't like that f of x there, you can just scratch it out and write y. It's the same difference. So, step 1 is still the same. Find a, b, and c. So, a is negative 6, b is negative 4, c is negative 5. Step 2 says you have to use the vertex formula. X equals the opposite of b over 2a. Remember, if you're going to use your calculator, put that in parentheses in the bottom. The opposite of 4, or negative 4 is positive 4, over 2 times negative 6 is negative 12. So that's going to give me negative 1/3, which is kind of messy, but we'll make it work. Step 3 says you're going to make this XY chart. Negative 1/3 is in the middle. Now, I don't want anything hard, so I'm going to put 0 here. 0 is 1/3 away from is negative 1/3, so if I got bigger by 1/3, I have to get smaller by 1/3, so I'm going to use negative 2/3. It doesn't matter that negative 2/3 is messy, because I'm not going to plug in negative 2/3. I'm going to plug in 0. It's going to do the work for me. Then I'm going to add 1 to 0, which means I'm going to subtract 1 to negative 2/3. So I have negative 1 and 2/3. Once again, I'm not going to plug in negative 1 and 2/3, because it's messy. I'm going to plug in 0. I'm going to plug in 1. Alright, so I'm going to start. I don't have to do any work for 0. C is negative 5. So the first thing I do is I put negative 5 in for 0. And now I already know that negative 2/3 is negative 5. Now, I'm going to plug in 1. So I'm going to say y equals negative 6 times 1 squared minus 4 times 1 minus 5. 1 squared is 1. That gives me negative 6 minus 4 minus 5. I get negative 15. It's going to go all the way over, give me negative 15 right here. Now I'm going to pick negative 1/3. So I'm going to plug in negative 1/3. Y equals negative 6 times negative 1/3 squared minus 4 times negative 1/3 minus 5. Alright, so negative 1/3 is squared is positive 1/9 times negative 6 is negative 6/9, or just fancy way to say negative 2/3. I add 4/3, so negative 2/3 and 4/3 turns into positive 2/3, minus 5 is negative 4 1/3. Now, to make my life easier, like I said, I'm just going to go by thirds, so I'm going to say there's 1, negative 1, there's negative 2. There's positive 1. There's positive 2. I just went by thirds to make my life easier when I go to graph. So negative 1/3, and then I go down to negative 4 1/3. I'm gonna I'll make the scales go by 2. So it's negative 2, negative 4. So notice I changed both the x's and the y's to different scales. You're allowed to do that. So I'm going to change the y's by 2's. So I'm going to go left 1/3, down to negative 4 1/3. It's going to be about right there. 0, 5, right there. Which means I have negative 2/3, 5, right there. And then I have 1, negative 15. And then negative 1, and I messed that up. 1, negative 15 right there. I almost forgot I changed my x scale. And then negative 1 down to, or negative 1 2/3 down to negative 15. So I make my U. It is symmetrical through my vertex, so everything looks pretty good. That's it. Alright, 28. I have y equals negative 3/4 x squared minus 4x minus 1. So step 1, I'm going to find a. It's negative 3/4. B, it's negative 4. C is negative 1. So I could, if I really want to, I could already put 0, negative 1 on my graph. I'm not going to do that in case I got to change my scale. Step 2, I'm going to say use the vertex formula, x equals the opposite of b over 2a. So the opposite of negative 4 is positive 4, all over 2 times negative 3/4. This is going to become 4 over negative 6/4, which turns into negative 2 2/3. So I'm going to make my XY chart. Put negative 2 2/3 in the middle. Now I'm just going to put negative 2 right here, and then 0, just because I like having 0. Now I know that 0 is negative 2 2/3 from there, so to find my other point, I'm just going to do 0 minus, or I'm going to do negative 2 2/3 minus 2 2/3. That will give me the next point that's going to rainbow over here. So that's negative 5 1/3. Now, I'm 2/3 away. I'm going to go to get this point. To get this point, I'm going to rainbow it over. So I'm going to take negative 2 2/3, and I'm going to minus 2/3. And that's going to give me negative 3 1/3. Alright? So that's how I got those other points. And the thing is, I don't have to worry about those other points because I'm not gonna plug them in. I don't care how messy they are. Now I'm gonna plug in 0 because c is negative 1, so I put negative 1 right there. I already know negative 5 1/3 is negative 1. I don't do any work for it. I'm gonna plug in negative 2. Y equals negative 3/4. Instead of x, I put negative 2. It's squared. Minus 4 times negative 2 minus 1. Negative 2 squared is positive 4. Positive 4 times negative 3/4 is negative 3 plus 8 minus 1. So I'm going to get positive 4. I don't have to plug in negative 3 1/3. I already know it's 4. Now I'm going to plug in negative 2 2/3. When I plug that in, I get 4 1/3. So I'm going to go 0, negative 1. I'm going to go over 5. And 1/3 and go down to negative 1. So it's about right there. I'm going to go negative 2. Oh, it's negative, so it's the wrong side. That makes more sense. So then I'm going to go negative 2 up to 4. So I'm going to go negative 3 1/3. It's right there. And now I'm going to go negative 2 2/3 up to 4 1/3. It's kind of right there. And it looks pretty close to being the center like I wanted it to be. Because remember, this dotted line right here is about negative 2 2/3. That's the center of my XY chart. Notice, guys, A is negative, which tells me it should have been a frowny face. It is a frowny face. So that's it for 28. Alright, number 30. And remember, if you don't like f of x, because that scares you, just cross off, put a y. A is 1/2. B is 1. There's no number in front, it's 1. So that's not a 0 for B. And then C is negative 3. I'm going to do step 2. X equals the opposite of B all over 2A. So I have the opposite of 1 all over 2 times 1/2. So I get negative 1. XY chart. Put negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and 2. I'm going to plug in 0. I get negative 3. I'm going to plug in 1. 1/2 times 1 squared plus 1 minus 3. I get 1/2 plus 1 minus 3. I get negative 1 1/2. That's going to rotate over, so I get negative 1 1/2. Now I'm going to plug in 2. 2 squared is 4. I'm going to say 1/2. Instead of x, I'm going to put 2 squared plus 2 minus 3. 2 squared is 4. Half of that is 2. 2 plus 2 minus 3 is negative 1. Alright, and I rotate it over. So now I go 0, negative 3, put a dot. 1, negative 1.5. Negative 1, negative 1.5. Negative 2, negative 1. 2, negative 1. Alright, and that's it for 30. Alrighty, 32, I have A is negative 5/3, B is 0, C is negative 4. We're going to do step 2. X equals the opposite of B over 2A. Remember, if you're using a calculator, put parentheses there. So I have 0 over 2 times negative 5/3. Doesn't matter, it's still 0. So xy, put 0 in the middle. Plug it in, 0 is negative 4. Now I'm just going to plug in 1. So I get y equals negative 5/3 times, actually I'm going to go by 3's. So I'm going to take negative 3 and negative 6, 3 and 6. So I'm going to put 3 squared minus 3 minus 4. 3 squared is 9. Negative 5/3 times 9 is negative 15, so I get negative 15 minus 3 minus 4. So I get negative 22. There's the rainbow effect. Now I'm going to plug in 6. So now I'm going to plug in 6 right here and right here. 6 squared is 36. 36 times negative 5/3 is negative 60. Ooh, minus 6. Minus 4, I get minus 70. So I'm going to go by 10s. So there's negative 10, negative 20, negative 30, negative 40, negative 50, negative 60, negative 70. And I have 0, negative 4, there's that right there. 3, negative 22. Negative 3, negative 22. Then 6, negative 70. And negative 6, negative 70. And that's it for 32. Alright, so they said to find the minimum or maximum value. Alright, so step 1. Find A, B, and C. A is 9. B is 0. There is no x, so B is 0. There was an x. If even though there's not a number, there's still a B. And then C is 7. Step 2 says I have to find the vertex. Because you have to find the vertex to be able to find out the value. But already I know that my graph is going to be a U, so I know it's going to be a minimum value. So step 2, x equals the opposite of b over 2a. So I put the opposite of 0 over 2 times 9. So I get 0 over 18, which is 0. Now, that's not my value, that's the x. So to find the x, I got to plug 0 in right there for x. So I say y equals 9 times 0 squared plus 7, y equals 7. That's my minimum value. So my minimum value equals 7. And that's it for 34. Alrighty, so step 1, find A, B, and C. A is negative 3, B is 18, C is negative 5. Since that's negative, I know it's a frowny face, which tells me I'm going to have a maximum value. Step 2 says you plug it in. The opposite of B, so the opposite of 18, all over 2 times A, I get negative 18 over negative 6, which is just positive 3. That's not my value, that's the x. I have to plug that x in right there and right there. So I get negative 3. Instead of x, I put 3 squared. Now guys, remember, if you don't like the g of x, you can just write y. So I say y equals negative 3 times 3 squared plus 18 times 3 minus 5. 3 squared is 9. I get minus 27 plus 54 minus 5. I get 27 minus 5, which is 22. So my maximum value equals 22. That's it for 36. Alright, 38. Step 1, I have to find A, which is negative 1/4, B, which is negative 7, C, which is 2. Since that's negative, remember, I'm going to have a frowny face. If you have a frowny face, you know you're going to have a maximum value. Step 2, x equals the opposite of b all over 2a. Remember, if you're going to use a calculator, put some parentheses there. So I have the opposite of negative 7, so I have positive 7 over 2 times negative 1/4. So I get 7 over negative 1/2. Dividing something by negative 1/2 is the same as multiplying it by negative 2, so I get negative 14. That's my x. I got to plug that in. Alright, so we're plugging in negative 14, so I say y equals negative 1/4 x, or negative 14 squared minus 7 times negative 14 plus 2. I get a quarter of 1, so I get negative 1/4 times 196 plus 98 plus 2, and that turns into positive 51. So your maximum value is just 51. That's it. 40, it says, which function has the widest graph? Closest to 0 is the widest. What I mean for A. So for the A in step 1. So if you look at answer A, y equals 2x cubed, A equals 2. B, y equals x squared, so A equals 1. C, y equals 0.5 x squared, so A equals 0.5. D, y equals negative x squared, so E equals negative 1. C is the closest to 0, so C is your correct answer. 42, they just said to find A, B, and C. They say y equals negative 0.01 x squared plus 0.7x plus 6. So A equals, they use the 0 in front of it, negative 0.01. B equals 0.7. C equals 6. That's it for 42. Alright, 44. I have y equals 0.5x squared minus 2x. A is 0.5, B is negative 2, C 0. That tells me the y-intercept, so 0, 0 is a point on the graph. Graph C is the only graph that can have 0, 0. So that's it for... Alright, so 46, I did A, B, and C. I know that one of the points on the graph is 0, 3. That's on both A and B. So I'm going to do my next one. I'm going to find the vertex. So I'm going to say the opposite. X equals the opposite of B over 2A. So I'm going to say the opposite of negative 2 is positive 2. Over 2 times a half is 1. That means 2 needs to be on my graph. I plug in 2. I get 0.5 times 2 squared minus 2 times 2 plus 3. 2 squared is 4. 4 times a half is 2. Minus 4 plus 3. I get 1. So graph B has 2, 1, and 0, 3 on it. So graph B is the answer for 46. Alright, 48 is pretty easy. A is negative 0.5. B is 0 because I always look for X to find B. A lot of people are going to tell me that B is negative 5 and it's not. C is negative 5. That's one of the main reasons I have you find all three. Like my XY chart. Because B is 0, I already know I could just use negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and 2. Because if I plugged in X equals the opposite of B over 2A, I'd get 0 over negative 1, which is just 0. That's why 0 is my vertex. Plug in 0, it's really easy, gives me negative 5. Now I'm going to plug in 1, except, I'll plug in 1. 1 squared, I get negative 0.5 minus 5. I'm going to get negative 5.5. That's going to rotate over. Now I'm going to plug in 2. 2 squared is 4. Half of that times negative is negative 2, so I get negative 7. Now I just need to plug that in my graph. Alright, so I have 0, negative 5. I go negative 1, a half, 5 and a half. And I go negative 2 down to 7. There's my graph. That's it for 48. Alright, 26. A is 0.25. B is negative 1.5. C is 3. Step 2, I'm going to plug it in. X equals the opposite of B, so I have 1.5 up top over 2 times 0.25. So I have 1.5 over 0.5, or I get X equals 3 as my Y-intercept. So I make my XY chart. This time 3 is in the middle, so I go up 1, I go up 1, I go down 1, I go down 1. Plug in 3. I plug in 3, I get 0.75. Now I'm going to plug in 2. I'm going to get positive 1. I rainbow positive 1 over to 4. Now I'm going to plug in 1. I'm going to get positive 1.75. Now I'm going to change my Y's. I'm going to go up by 4. I'm going to go up by quarters. So that's 1. And that's 2. So I'm going to go 1, 1.75. 2, 1. 3.75. And there's my other points. And there's my U. That's it for 50. Alright, 52, pretty easy. A is 1.75. B is 0. C is negative 2.5. X equals the opposite of B over 2A. 0 over anything. So even though it's 3.5, doesn't matter. It's still 0. So I make my XY chart. Put negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and 2. 0 is negative 2.5. Plug in 1. I get 1.75 minus 2.5. I get negative 0.75. That rainbows over. Now I'm going to plug in 2. 2 squared is 4. 4 times 1.75 is 7. Minus 2.5 is 4.5. Alright, so I go 0, negative 2.5. Negative, I go 1, negative 0.75. It's like 3 quarters. Exactly 3 quarters. Negative 1.75. I go 2 up to 4 and a half. And that's it for 52. Alright, I want you to do 54 and 56 on your own. 58, I have, it just talks about a woodland mouse, and they want to know, can the mouse jump over the fence? Well, if this talks about his jumping, so you're just going to find the max of his jumping. I know it's a max because this is a negative, so it tells me it's a frowny face. Alright, so I plug in A and B. I get negative 1.3 over 2 times negative 0.2. I multiply that. I get 3.25. I have to plug that in for X. So I say Y equals negative 0.2, 3.25 squared plus 1.3, 3.25. I end up getting about 2.1. So the mouse can't jump over the fence. That's its max height. Alright, there's 2 mistakes on purpose in this video, just FYI.